All right, we're level and we're live.
Okay.
Okay. I always think I have a spiel, but the spiel's always different, like as far as an introduction goes.
Okay.
Welcome to the Home for Humanity podcast. Welcome, Andrew, Mr. Barkis.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. And this podcast, my intention is I got into real estate 2 years ago. Actually, this past April Fool's, I realized, I passed my test this day 2 years ago. And in many ways, it was like an April Fool's joke for me personally in my heart, because I was like, what am I doing with my life? I moved to Washington 3 years ago now, almost, from Missouri to learn about outdoor education. It was in the winter of my naturalist training that I decided to get into real estate. And now currently, and we connected when we first met on Scouts, and so now I'm doing this multi-generational Scout program to help steward communities and home and connections between people and the places they call home. And this podcast is a way for me to just process this journey for myself as well, and meet other people who I resonate with, who I see as doing similar work along those lines in all different ways.
Right.
So in different settings. So people from real estate, people from outdoor education. I just want to go.
And in this case,
all over it.
All the above, because I'm involved in all that.
And I want to talk about that. Yeah. So, my very first question, who are you? How are you?
Sure.
And even as for how are you today? How are you feeling here in this room?
I'm feeling good. It's Friday.
Yeah.
So, it's, I wish it was sunny out. I was talking this morning to some friends and saying, I think this is fourth winter now. We had our little spring, and then we go back to fourth winter. And of course, I've got a big parade this weekend. It's supposed to be like 45 degrees and rainy. But I'm doing good. I'm feeling good, well rested, and it's been a good week. It's been busy. It's been great to settle back into work after the legislative session that ended just almost a month ago now. So I've taken a little bit of time for myself and reconnect with family, and a little healing, because it's a pretty brutal 60-day session. And then just get back to work here at hometown. So who am I? Andrew Barkis. First and foremost, I'm a husband, a father. I've got 2 boys. My son turns 30 tomorrow, my oldest. My youngest is 21. He's a student down at Pepperdine, junior in college. And I've been married for 32 years. 32 years. It'll be 32 years. And I own this company that we're sitting here today in Lacey, Washington, called Hometown Property Management. So I've been doing housing, real estate, property management for over 25 years. We manage single family homes all throughout this region. So it's been kind of fun to do that, and challenging. And then I'm also a state representative. So in 2016, I was appointed to the House of Representatives, and ran for my first election in 2016 and won. And I'm about to embark on my next journey of another campaign for my 5th term. So I've been in the legislature for 8 years. In the legislature, I do a lot of stuff. I immediately came into the legislature as somebody who had housing experience in business and property management and rental. And as you know, and I'm sure we'll talk about, there's a lot of this going on within the landlord-tenant realm. And so I've been working a lot of policy around that. I've worked very successfully in a bipartisan way on supply side housing issues, middle housing, which is what we met at that meeting. And then I'm also the ranking member on transportation, so I am the number 2 guy in the House of Representatives for all things transportation, policy related, and write the budget every year, which is getting more and more challenging. So do all those things transportation related. And on top of that, I love the outdoors. I still work with Boy Scouts. I just had a meeting with the leadership yesterday working on Camp Thunderbird, which is not too far from here. I chair the outdoor caucus because I love everything outdoors, the outdoor economy, and so I have worked on outdoor education. I worked on that bill and different things. And when in my free time, you'll find me outside. I go camping, hiking, skiing, play golf, enjoy anything I can do when the weather is not quite as icky as it is today. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I want to talk about the outdoor caucus too, because I'm still like, what is that?
It's pretty cool. When I found out about that in the legislature, I said the same thing. I'm like, there's an outdoor caucus? What is that? And then, now I'm the chair of it. So I have been for years. Yeah.
Well, can I ask you a few more questions about that?
Sure.
And then I'll circle back. What do they focus on? What's the intention?
The outdoor caucus is, we call it bicameral, so it's the House and the Senate. Bipartisan, so it's, Democrats and Republicans. And it's everything around the outdoors, policy, budget, stakeholder groups, so think everything from outdoor backcountry horsemen to Washington Trails Association, you name it, and then other stakeholders. But it provides a forum for us to discuss the outdoors in Washington State. And so part of that, and when I was getting involved, was about the outdoor economy. And a lot of people don't know how huge the impact of our outdoors, our recreation, our parks, wildlife, everything that goes into it, is a huge economic driver for the state of Washington. And it brings in a lot of tax revenue to the state, and access and opportunity and tourism. And so that's what attracted me to it. I was like, wow, why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we really capturing this this natural aspect of Washington? It's one of the most beautiful states in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been awesome because I've had a chance to work with state parks and to assure that, that the policy and the funding is there. Access for all, making sure that removing barriers for people to access, everything from parks, trails to their favorite fishing spot. And then really developing the economy piece of it. How do we promote Washington State? How do we worked to reinvigorate the tourism department in Washington State. Believe it or not, we didn't even have one. We had one years ago, it was cut. And we're like one of the only states that doesn't spend any money to advertise ourselves, and that's kind of weird.
Word of mouth, in Washington.
Yeah, best kept secret, which I hate that statement. But out of that also is policy. So outdoor education. We started having this conversation when we had these presentations. It was brought forth that there are certain segments that are just not getting outside, and youth today, for a myriad of reasons, right? Whether it's access, whether it's knowledge, whether they don't know that they've got, what it's like to be outside. I grew up as a Boy Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout, Scoutmaster. I've been camping since I was little, and I couldn't believe that people didn't know. I was like, how do you not know that there's, to do this? But so policy was developed, and one of those was recreating and working on a robust outdoor education program. And so I worked with colleague, Representative Rule from the 42nd District, and I co-sponsored a bill a couple of years ago that called for the development of an outdoor education program through the Department of Education, OSPI. And then on the heels of that, we actually got it funded. So money was appropriated into that to actually do something, because a lot of times there's policy but no money. And now there's development of programs. We actually went and toured last year up on Woodbury Island, some schools that are, 365 year-long outdoor education programs for, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at how do we preserve the camps that we have in the state of Washington, how do we intersect with Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and Boys and Girls Clubs and, and these programs to the schools. And so I've been working on that. We had another bill this year. It didn't go very far, but it basically was asking the Washington State Parks Commission, as they're doing their planning on state parks, to look at their facilities and work to accommodate future outdoor education. So making sure that, accessibility and facilities are set up so as they're making their plans for certain parks, that we can start utilizing these beautiful state parks we have to facilitate this program. So it's cool. It's just taking off, and more work to be done on that. But I just love our state. We have amazing state parks, and they're treasures, and we need to preserve them and support them and use them. So, and everybody should be able to do that.
Yeah. Oh, Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've done, I guess the only state park I've had programs in, because I've done some city parks, is St. Edward's, and I loved teaching there. And there's this, outdoor education being the driver of why I am here in this point in my life. How to figure out, how any natural space is a teacher, and having the space set up for like any public school to have space to come. I just think, more intersection there. So Whidbey Island I've heard has great programs, and I've known some, but how are the policies and the budgeting that you're working with in the caucus affecting those programs? Is it specifically for state parks like you're speaking of?
No, it's the nexus with state parks is facilities, right? So making sure that a lot of people don't know that in Washington State Parks we have something called environmental learning centers, and many parks, I think there's 4 or 6 of them, throughout the state, that people can rent. And people can access those, and they are literally set up to bring in 40, 50 people and whatever. Of course, there are programs within those parks to be able to access, but really it's the premier one that's been since I was a kid is CISPS, right? And that's down by Packwood area, the CISPS River. It's a week-long program. It was my first introduction, I think 6th grade, even before Boy Scouts. It was my first introduction to river ecosystems and this, that, and the other thing, and everything about the environment, and it was an amazing program. And you went and stayed there in the cabin, and it was fun. It was like camp. It was camp. So right now, I know that the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, or the school, in the state, the curriculum is being developed. The various school districts are able to access this curriculum. The money that's put aside, then they can access the resources to be able to put this on. And it is the hope that more and more school districts will recognize this as an opportunity and create that program. So now you have school districts that are contracting with CISPS, and it's kind of been the only thing, right? So it's limited. You can only do so many. Yeah. My vision, and many others, and the meeting I had yesterday, so we're working on this beautiful camp on Summit Lake. It's about 20 minutes from here. Camp Thunderbird. It's been around for, I went to Boy Scout camp there 40 years ago. So it's been around for 75 years or more, right? And like so many other beautiful pieces of property, over the years, decline and resources. And so now I'm helping with a robust program to rebuild and repurpose and bring it up to standards, from ADA to water systems to whatever, and not only have it as a Boy Scout camp and a Cub Scout camp, but boys and girls, and also this outdoor education program. And then I've been working with the governor's office. We're trying to do an inventory of all the camps that are remaining in the state of Washington. So you have church camps and YMCA and YWCA and Girl Scout boys, all these camps, and people don't really know they exist, right? And we're losing them
because they're dying. They need biodiversity back. They need energy.
And they're also beautiful pieces of property. Yeah. And if they're sitting there laying fallow and they're not being used, they're going to be developed. They're going to be turned back to something else. Yeah. And so it's critical that we make sure that we're identifying these to make sure that those are available for future generations. Yeah. So it's a big lift. But it's pretty cool, and it's starting. It's slow, and we're working on different plans, so I'm excited about it.
The saving the camps. There's just this, please save the camps. Because like so many of my fellow nature teachers and outdoor educators and mentors and facilitators, people who just really believe in like teaching outside, that just the simple environment of it, like the indoor generation. Have you heard that phrase?
Oh yeah.
Is it us? Is it me, or is it the younger? I don't know, but it's like all of us at this point, and the need to get just simply our day-to-day living outside. And camps is such an access point, and when you're young, like we have core memories.
I tell you, absolutely, and
it changed us.
It does change you, right? And I'll never forget. Like I said, I've been involved in Scouts for forever. When I was an adult leader working with my patrols and stuff, and my son was, he grew up outside camping. We live on a lake, so we would camp out at home in the backyard on the lake, and very young, and then got into scouts. And I remember taking youth out that had never been outside. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first time we all showed up for this hike, and some of them showed up and they had tennis shoes on, and jeans, and and I'm like, okay, I gotta start at square one here, And so we talked in the parking lot, and we're like, okay, are we ready to do that? And we talked about equipment and everything else, and then you realize that some of these, they don't have the resources to do that. So we found a way to get them access to boots, and I had this Boots for Boys idea, but Washington Trails Association does that, REI does that, Scott, they have these, great equipment, what they call garages or whatever, and people can borrow, they can rent, they can give away stuff, they have swap meets. So we found ways to connect people with what they needed. But I'll never forget, you take somebody out on a trail for the first time and their eyes open up and they're looking at the trees, and you come up to that river and they're like, whoa, and it does change them. And so the next time, and I'll never forget this one young boy come up to me, and he's like, thank you, Mr. Barkis. He says, when's our next event? Where are we going again? I'm like, hey, guess what? Next month we're going camping. Oh, I can't wait. They're so excited. So it does change lives. And I was telling somebody, I'm a Republican. There's a lot of labels that are put on people. They're like, oh, you must not worry about the climate or the environment. And I was like, I was an environmentalist before it was cool. I have my environmental merit badge. I did that in 1982, and part of that merit badge is you go out and you sit in the woods for like 4 hours in a little area and you observe everything. I can remember that today as clear as the day I did it.
Yeah.
And you're observing bugs and the moss and this and that, and you have to write all this down, and then you have to write a report about it. And then you have to learn about how that little square of earth is part of the entire community and climate and environment that we live in, and how important that little square of earth is. Now think of all the tens of thousands of scouts that have done that same thing. Mm-hmm. So, the more we do that with people, it gives a perspective, and it gives a knowledge base, and it plants those seeds. And, as we look to care for our environment in a way that it's not driven by ideologies and narratives and everything else, but really just a overall understanding of the world we live in. So you can't do that on an iPhone.
No, and it's so important. A couple of things are coming up. Like my father is Republican, and I think growing up and witnessing, we grew up out in the middle of nowhere, and so there was also that, like, I had to be connected to nature because the sunsets were my friends, the trees were my friends, the wind. And I had friends, and I learned socialization. I think this is, I don't know, I'm kind of like getting nervous now that I'm saying this stuff. But I think the way I see my dad now, the way he grew up so connected to the environment, like in some ways, I'm like, that man is a druid.
Yeah.
And I don't care about the connotations that people put on him for that political affiliation. I just don't give a crap.
Yeah.
Because of the way that I think rural people, and societally, right now, it's really important to recognize that, like, when you look at our country, it's a lot of swaths of red, and then these super populated places are super blue.
Right.
And I grew up right on the outside of Kansas City, and so, like, getting field trips to the city, and, like, I mean, Kansas City's small compared to, like, Seattle or San Francisco or whatever, but the city life is still very real there, and the cultural divide I've always held within me of, like, well, what is it about access? Like, it's not just money when we talk about the highest and best use of property. Like, why are those camps not, and thank God for efforts of people who preserve them, but at the same time, like, what do you think the values are of developers who and maybe they have to because this is what they do, but they see a piece of, like, a dying camp, and they see the highest and best dollar use I can find, and they design a way to get that. And then there's these parts of any suburb now that's, like, old-timey houses, and then there's like super modern
Sure.
stuff right next to it. And Seattle's pretty cool in that way, and it's I like the old world, new world clash in many contexts. But what do you have to say to developers maybe who really only see the dollar amount with property like that?
So I'm a free market guy, and I in the policy world and knowing the supply and knowing the need that we have, but I will also temper that with balance. Okay, so you said something earlier, and I think this is really important. There's this divide that we always talk about in our country: political divide, cultural divide, whatever. But when you look at it, I grew up in a small town, Chehalis, about 30 miles from here, south. Very small town, you know. People I knew were loggers. They worked in the woods. There was industry. There was all this different stuff. And so my perspective, Olympia was a big city. Seattle was a big city, right? Today, it's really, you have this, we call it Seattle-centric thinking, and there's a detachment from Chehalis or from somewhere in Okanagan, right? Or somewhere in Eastern. There's this detachment we don't even know what that is. Everything that shaped our world is here. So then you have this, when you look at the political divide in our state, population determines the districts. There's 49 legislative districts, and we all represent an equal amount of people, 170,000 people, right? Now, to get that 170,000 people in Eastern Washington, you might represent like the 7th district, it's like its own state, right? It's huge. It's all these counties because it's very sparsely populated. In Seattle, you may just have Capitol Hill or a portion thereof. And you have all these districts concentrated in the Seattle Puget Sound. So you start to think about the policy that we've seen over the last 10, 12, 20 years when it comes to real estate, Growth Management Act, all this other stuff. It's like, this is what they see, and then they look over here and say, you can't build over there, you can't do this over here, you can't do this over here. It should all be like this, because this is what's shaped our world. And then you have people like myself and others that are going, that's all well and good for you, but it's not good for me, and it's not good for the rest of the people.
It's not our world.
Right. Yeah. And so the balance is to be able to look at, to your example about that camp, we should work to preserve the assets that we have. I'm big into conservation. I've worked with the Farmland Trust group and the conservation groups of Washington and everything else. But you have to seek that balance. So you have groups that, in my own district, that look at it and say, here's the dotted line of the growth management, here's the boundary, and you can't touch any of this, even though this hasn't been a farm for 50 years, even though this hasn't been a camp for 80 years, even though this hasn't been. And what I say is that balance is to make sure we utilize this land in the best way within balancing and preserving all this other stuff. So keep that preservation, keep that conservation, build smart, do the things we need to do. But this all or nothing approach doesn't work. And what we're seeing is the battle lines literally around the line, right, of this urban growth.
Yeah.
And so you have these developments, like you said, that mash of old and new and coming up. And on this side of the street I can build homes, on this side of the street I can't build homes. But I really need that land because we're running out of land to build homes to house the people of the state. And because we don't have that supply, what's the byproduct? Increased costs, increased rents, shortage of supply, affordable housing crisis that we'll probably talk about. So we need to have smart policy where we're looking at both. How do we develop smart? And how do we preserve and continue to preserve? But I don't think it can be a blanket statement. I don't think it can just be, we can never touch it, we can never do this. I think you have to find that balance, right? So hopefully we can work towards that, but it's tough in this state.
It is. With the urban, is it true Washington is the only state with urban growth areas, like with the Growth Management Act, the way it's set up here?
It's, we have one of the most stringent. Other states, California, Oregon, they have variations of that. They call it different things. The way they work within the urban, the growth, the shoreline management, there's all these different elements. We have one that is incredibly stringent. It's been in place for a lot of years, and it was never intended to be that, right? It was intended to work, as you and I are talking about, in balance, prevent sprawl, smart growth, develop infrastructure, promote the economy, build houses, all these different things. But in the last 20 plus years, it has focused just on environment. And so that has been the driver, with groups like FutureWise and everything else. And they're so powerful that you can't do this. One more example real quickly, because it's a good one. The other day I went to the Bethel School District, which is up in Graham area, and I celebrated the groundbreaking for the new Bethel High School. Very exciting, right? Part of the process, in order for them to build this new high school, there was only one piece of land that they could do it that would accommodate it. And guess what? It was outside the urban growth boundary. So we had to pass legislation back in 2018 to allow for the siting of this school literally across the street from where the boundary was. And what a fight that was. It took 2 years to get that legislation through. And after that legislation was passed, between 2018 and now, they were challenged by every single environmental group and all this, and they had to find a way to work on this. The most amazing thing that I heard when I was up there at this celebration, because they finally got it ready and they're breaking ground and they're about to start construction, 17 years. 17 years from the idea of we need a new high school to accommodate our growth and our students, and the high school we're in is falling around all around us, to breaking this, to building it. 17 years. And if you think back, even 10 years ago, right? If they would have been able to do that 10 years ago, the cost would probably be half of what it's going to cost to do this now. And all the requirements that were put upon them, that's the Growth Management Act. That's what it does to situations like that. That's what it does to developers. That's what it does to developments. And that's why you see the problems we have today, because that inability to have flexibility and working together like that.
It's like slowed everything down in some ways because of the bureaucracy of like the process is just.
We're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands short to meet the need today and in the future for housing. We call it a crisis. It is a crisis because policymakers like myself and people like us that are in the business, do you have 50 houses to show today? No. I rented 7 homes last month, the lowest total in the last 15 years. I have nothing to offer. And as a result, a house that would be 5 years ago $1,200 is now $1,700 because the market pushes it, right? So
and who does that hurt the most?
The people who can't afford it.
And the line, it's funny, gosh, I'm thinking of, and I wish I could remember, so forgive, like the exact treaty that it was that pushed the native people from their lands. And it was like in the amount of time that it took for all of the politics to come through, it's like the people are starving, like the displacement of people. Like there is no paperwork or legislative process that can prevent like the survival. I guess I'm thinking like the survival aspect, and like in that example, in the way that exact process and the exact ramifications have trickled into like what you're describing. And why can't it be as flexible? And why would it seem like a flexible thing to actually draw a line, but at the same time you have to draw the line to do something. So it's this.
But lines are movable.
So is
lines are movable, and processes evolve, and the problem in our state is that and I don't want to get too partisan, but we've had one way of thinking for 30 years, and we've stifled a lot of other ideas and creativity and ability to have these. And in my short time in the legislature, I've been pushing against that, to bring people together, to collaborate, to have these conversations, and ask the question why. Why can't we do that? It's ridiculous. We had a piece of legislation this year that said exactly that. You got a housing development here, you have all the infrastructure, water, sewer, garbage, everything is there, and you have a piece of land over here that could be exactly the same and tie into this infrastructure, but that's outside the line. So we should allow building within this limited scope, right? And the answer is hard no, because we're not going to move that line. We're not going to violate the urban growth boundary. We're not going to violate the GMA. I'm like, we're not violating. We need to change. We need to adapt, right?
Yeah.
So I think that when we look at these different things, what it ends up doing is it causes other problems. And it creates other issues in areas that we don't need to have these problems, right? We have a massive problem in the realm that I work in landlord-tenant law. We have a battle between tenants and housing providers. And the tenants are pushing, right? All the activists and groups are pushing. Rent control, just had that.
Squatters' right.
Squatters' right, policy, all this other stuff, because rent's too damn high.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, those of us that know that are in the business are going, yeah, we agree, rent's high.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. I have nothing to rent. There's nothing here to rent. And if I talk to the people here in the city of Lacey and what's being built, there's no more buildable land. And if I want to build something, if I want to develop something, it's so cost prohibitive, and the regulatory and all the new climate policies, and we've added on, that if you and I came up with a great idea to build something, it's going to be 4 or 5 years before we get it off the ground and get through all the stuff. And are we able to do it affordable? Well, the answer is no.
Yeah.
But there's a way to change that. And you change that through policy, you change that through legislation, you change that through collaboration, and finding this balance between protecting our environment, protecting our climate, protecting our lands, but also allowing for what is needed for society, right? A school shouldn't take 17 years to build.
Yeah.
That's a generation.
Right.
It's an entire school generation plus who did not have access to those facilities and did not have that. And so what do you have instead? You have a generation going through a high school that literally is crumbling. You have all these portable buildings packed onto this piece of land at kind of a comet, because growth is not stopping. People are moving here. Families are expanding. You have more and more students coming into the school, just putting the pressure. We hear it all the time, right? We've done a ton of funding for schools and education, but you also have to have the facilities, so you have to have this balance. So,
do you think having the facility, like connecting more schools with more natural spaces while preserving those natural spaces, will actually help accommodate the growth and keep people connected to nature?
Part of the requirements of building this new Bethel High School, you should see it. It's unreal. I mean, it is absolutely unreal what they have to do. Now, in a way, it's really cool. It's really good. It's nowhere near a high school that you and I probably went to, right? This has an environmental, it's a huge piece of land, and the set-asides, and the buffers, and the water, and you look at how they have to build it, right? To accommodate this. Those are all the things they had to check the boxes in order to be able to do this, because of the pressures put on by these organizations. Now, a lot of that's really cool. A lot of that's really great. My concern with some of that is the cost, right? The taxpayers have to pay for that. So you're building a school in this property that is 10 times, 25 times more expensive than it would cost to build a school normally, because you had to do all this in order to accommodate that. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be amazing, and the students are literally going to have access to outdoor environmental aspects because of where it's located, So that's great if you're willing to pay for it.
Sure, yeah. And to me, well, I some of my classes were actually in classrooms were windowless. And so it's like, wow, they're like that simple thing wouldn't take all these extra millions just to implement, but
a window, yeah.
But yeah. I would like to get into the affordable and middle housing and
sure.
Why are you known for that? I have some of when I was at Hill Day with the realtors.
Was that a good experience? Did you enjoy it? Is that your first time doing that?
It was. It was.
Cool.
It is cool, and I'm not. When I was on the government affairs board, which there's a lot moving in my life, so I decided to not continue with the board. I was on that government affairs board for a little over a year, because when I first started, they were getting ready to go to Hill Day. So I waited a full year because I'm like, I really want this experience. And I walked away with feeling like that's just not enough time.
Yeah.
It's just, and I understand the process. And we were there with the educators as well. So we was like realtors and educators. And I'm like, I love the intention, and I love the process, and I love,
It's intense, though.
It's intense.
Yeah.
And I also wondered, like, if we didn't already know the people we were meeting with in some cases, and I didn't know anybody, but, like, are we actually getting across what we're asking for here? Like, is there, and of course there's probably all these other platforms for people like you to learn about causes, but maybe that's just because this is my speed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, okay, so every legislator is different. I'm known as one of the most accessible in the legislature when it comes to meetings and meeting people and being out there in the halls and doing different things. It's just the way I'm wired, you know. Thank my dad for that. Yeah. But you know, some are not. You know, we have it. Session is an interesting dynamic because it's very condensed. This year was 60 days. Next year is 105 days, a long session. I hate the 60-day sessions because we're doing exactly the same amount of work in 60 days. And I mean, it's just like from day one to the end, it's like, wow.
What's the work like? Can you explain a little bit about the sessions? Because even before I got there, I was like, short session, long session, and my husband works in PR stuff, and so he tracks different states and when their sessions are stuff, and I'm like, what are you doing? Can you like
sure.
that explain like I'm 5 subreddit style?
Yeah. So okay, so people ask me that, you know, what do you do as a state representative? So I mean, representative government, right? So
you explain the districts.
All the districts, right? And so, and we all represent these people, the people of our districts and the state of Washington, and as a body, right? And so, we're lawmakers. We're passing laws that affect everybody in the state of Washington. So we're passing laws around policy, and we're doing budgets around how we fund things. You know, from supporting our schools to our roads to whatever. It's all the governmental services, right? But the legislature is the policy-making branch, and the executive and judicial, all that stuff we learned as kids. Session, so we're full-time, well, actually, excuse me, we're part-time, but it's really full-time. Because you have duties and responsibilities. I'm responsible for my district. So this is interim right now, right? So we're not in session, we're still legislators, we're still elected until the next election, right? And now I'm meeting with constituents. I'm working on issues in cities. I'm working on housing policy. I'm working on transportation. I'm traveling over here. I'm doing all the time. In session, we bring everybody together from the entire state. And for those days, we work on policy and budgets and issues. And so it all surrounds what we call committee work. So I'm on the housing committee, I'm on the transportation committee. Legislators are on all these various committees. Policy intakes through the legislative process into the committee. So we spend the first several weeks in committee hearing bills, hearing policy, and then deciding, the majority decides, but you know, which bills are gonna move out of committee and have a chance to go to the floor of the House where we as a body will vote on that, yes or no, right? And if it does, it passes, then it goes to the Senate and does the exact same thing. So the whole thing is structured around this time in committee, and then we have certain cutoff dates, and then we have time that we do our floor time, where we're voting on all these bills, and then we go back to committee, and then some of us are writing budgets at the same time, so we start day one writing budgets. And then during that same process, we're meeting with constituents, we're meeting with groups, we're meeting, you know. So if you look at my day on any given day or on a week, and it's every day, there's no holidays, there's no weekend, it's every day. We'll get a day off, you know, I mean, Saturday I may not have to work or Sunday. But if you look at my schedule, as the week progresses, I'll have, you know, my committee time blocked, I'll have my hours blocked, and then every other space is filled with meetings. So you're coming to meet me, right? And so I'll say, 15-minute meeting, right? You notice that, right? When you're running around, so come in, hi, how are you doing? What's your issue? Oh, this is your thing. Oh, great. You know, nice to meet you. Have a great day. Out the door you go. Next one walks in. Oh, hey, how you doing? I mean, and it is crazy, and you're trying to do that. But some are better than others, and some, like, I try to engage. I try to find out, you know, what it is that you're doing. I try to allow for the time. Obviously, like, you met me after the fact, and we connected. And I said, hey, yeah, follow up with me. I'm more willing to talk to you. But constituents, when they come with an issue, are to me are like elevated to the highest. So we get groups and stuff coming through all the time with their asks and their issues and their bills or whatever. But if some individual comes and has this, hey, I've got a problem, I'm trying to do X, Y, or Z, if I can help, if my office can help, if the legislature can help, I've literally written bills around issues that came out of a conversation, something that was broken or needed to be fixed. So it's pretty cool. How are we doing on time? We doing good?
We're at 11. Let me just real quick check. Great, yeah, we're okay. What's your hard cutoff? I remember you said noon.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
I blocked plenty of time.
So some of these priorities, there were so many things that the legislator was working on that were not priorities for the realtors, but there was these 3 major priorities I want to go through.
Sure.
Because you are like the lot splitting guy, right? Were you the initial guy behind that? And then I really want to get into rural detached ADUs. So maybe let's start with lot splitting. Or I also want to get into co-housing. So let's just talk about middle housing for a while.
I love my that was a success. Failure, success. So we'll talk about a little bit both. Over the last couple of years, as we've been talking about this affordable housing. So back in 2018, I was working with Association Washington Business and the realtors and all sorts of people about, we got to do something about this.
Yeah.
And past then Congressman Denny Heck, now Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck, he was kind of doing the same thing back in DC. He and I met. We was kind of like, wow, we're doing the same thing. And then we were working with this group called Up for Growth and trying to find out how to remove. So policy started to be developed 2018, 2019. We all know what happened in 2020 with COVID. All this stuff happened. We were virtual sessions for 2 years. That sucked. It was the worst ever. Bad policy came out of the virtual sessions, in my opinion, and many others. So we picked it back up in 21 and 22 and started working, and I started to find those who I could work with in the majority. So I had my partners, right? Representative Gregerson, Democrat from up in Federal Way over at CTAC. Representative Bateman from right here in the 22nd District, Democrat. Representative Wallen, Democrat from the Kirkland area, and we may have completely juxtaposed positions on everything else, but man, we were like lockstep on we got to do something about housing. And so we just started working, and then I went with, and then now Denny Heck was Lieutenant Governor, and he brought this group together, and we started bringing everybody together, right? And it was like we all got to sit down at the table, and from day one, be willing to give something, right? So we can create what I call 70% policy. 100% policy sucks. Doesn't work. That means it's biased, right? It's like partisan or whatever. 70% policy means that you and I had to give something to make this work, right? And so we brought future wise and builders and realtors and cities and you name it. We all got together and a bunch of legislators and we figured out. And we started that in 22 and we tried to do the middle housing bill in 22 and it was just a little too controversial for some. And others were like, oh, you're banning single family homes. I'm like, no, we're not. So we tried, but it was a short session and we didn't get it through. And there were a couple other bills that we were trying to work on, like ADUs, right? Couldn't believe it. I mean, we had this great ADU bill that Gregerson and I were running. And it was fought by the cities. It was fought by this because, oh, it's gonna, you gotta have parking and you gotta do, and we're like, that defeats the purpose of creating affordable housing. So we worked through that whole thing. Well, then in 22, at the end of 22, Bateman and I got together in that same group. And we said, all right, look, we're gonna make 23 the year of housing. So we realtors were like, yeah, year of housing, we're gonna get behind this. We worked on a suite of bills dealing with all sorts of stuff. And we came together and when we hit the floor running, the door running on 23, session on 23, we had like 10, 12 pieces of policy, right? ADUs, middle housing, existing housing bills, permit reform, lot splitting, rural ADU, we had all this stuff. And we went to work. And so now you got to go through all that committee process, everything I said. And at the end of the day, we were pretty successful. Those were bills that were, most of those were Democrat bills with Republican co-sponsors, some Republican bills. We passed a lot of legislation, including a good ADU bill, a middle housing bill, permit reform, some other stuff. lot splitting, my bill, which I think personally is one of the most impactful bills that is out there because it will do so much, was kind of the sacrifice at the end. And it didn't get through the Senate, even though it passed damn near unanimous in the House. In the Senate, they were like, oh, it's too much. We can't do this one and all these. It's too much. We've got to focus on middle housing. And I'm like, whatever, man. Let's get through what we can get through. But let's bring it back in the 24 session. So we did that. So then in the summer of 23 and the interim of 23, Bateman and I continued to work together, and Gregorson and I toured around the state from the Tri-Cities to everywhere, found the co-housing bill by working with this great organization called Sightline and a couple other affordable housing groups, and toured some properties in Kirkland and other things. And Gregorson and I came up with this great bill and worked with them, and we were like, okay, we're gonna run this bill, and we're gonna anticipate that it's probably gonna take at least 2 or 3 years to get it passed, because there's been a prohibition on this type of housing and rural ADUs and then lot split. Majority, in a nod to the work that I have done with their members and everything on housing, day one of session, we ran bills off the floor of the House. Never done that in my 8 years. Actually, day one is just all a bunch of pomp and circumstances and formalities and stuff. We ran bills, and the third bill run was my bill, lot split. Amazing. And we ran that bill, and it passed 92-2, I think, or something like that. And so off it goes, and we had already done all the work in the interim to fix all the problems that everybody had with that bill that were concerns. And so I'm thinking it's going to sail through the process. Well, it didn't, because it got to the Senate, and certain senators and certain chairs of committees, that I will remain nameless, you can do your research, still had concerns. And remember I was talking about GMA and all that stuff, and okay, so there's still a group that in theory likes this, but as long as you don't do it in my district, and you don't do it over here, and you don't do it over here, and it could impact us over here. And what happens if you've been like, oh my God, we did all the work to answer those questions. We have a stakeholder process. We have a bill that passed 2 years in a row, damn near unanimous, and you're gonna hold it up here. And so we had one meeting. It was not a good meeting, and I got really frustrated because people that were involved in this, that had been working very hard, all of a sudden certain groups started to add on more things. I'm like, wait a minute, we didn't agree upon this. We have an agreement. We have this policy dialed in. All you gotta do is run it through the committee, and this is gonna be there. And everybody almost agreed that this was one of the most powerful bills in the housing realm. And that chair and that committee and that Senate did not run that bill. It died. So lot splitting is languishing, right? Will I bring it back next year? We'll see. I still believe in the policy, but the process is really frustrating to me.
The things that the environmental groups actually use as reasoning, and like when you said they kept on adding stuff onto it, were they things that like made sense?
No.
Or
trees.
Okay.
The tree group was concerned because you might have to cut, because we were not. You see, in order to develop a piece of property, there are so many requirements. Mm-hmm. If I go out and I pull out those weeds, I gotta probably replace those weeds by some code, by some policy. If I cut this tree down, I gotta plant 10 more to replace it. Lot splitting by its nature, right, is to look at, like, Lacey is a classic example. It's an example I use. If you look at a lot of these neighborhoods right now, these are lots that have been split over the course of time, right?
Right.
And if you look at a lot of the development that was done, they were the old style. You had what we call rear load or alley, right? So remember the lots like I grew up on. You have the house here, here's the street, front yard, big backyard with an alley, maybe a garage back here or something. Mm-hmm. Well, as time has come, you have this huge piece of land that is nobody's using. Maybe you're older and you're not using it anymore. So the lot split says as long as you meet these criteria, size or anything else, you can split that through a very simple process. You can sell it, you can build an ADU. If it's big enough, you can build a house. If it's big enough, you could middle housing, you can build a duplex or a fourplex. But you also have to be able to utilize existing, infrastructure, and you can't create, more requirements to add, 10 parking spots and all, that would make it prohibitive, right? Barriers. But then these groups add on other things in order to find ways to kill it.
Yeah.
Because they don't want it.
Right.
And so if Island County does not want this type of, they don't want growth. They don't want lot split. They don't want ADUs. They don't want short-term rentals. They don't want, NIMBY, not in my backyard, not on my island, right? And other groups, they're pretty loud. And when those other groups are influencing the certain people who are representing them, and those certain people that are representing them happen to be the chairs of those certain committees where these bills have to go through, you can do the math, right? It's not going to happen because they're responsible for their constituents and whatever. So it's really frustrating when these special interests kind of, on both sides, but these special interests, especially in the environmental community, all you got to do is listen to some of the testimony on some of these bills. The other one you mentioned was rural ADUs. We've been trying to allow for the development of attached and detached ADUs outside the urban growth boundary, right? They're already being built.
Yeah.
And everything else. It was killed again because of FutureWise, those same groups, those same advocates. I was sitting in committee one day, and a lot of it's remote testimony, and people were testifying. I was watching this one particular lady was testifying, and she's sitting in her beautiful cabin on some island and fire in the fireplace. It's a very nice scene, and she's just railing against how you're not going to build this. This will create sprawl, and you're going to do. I'm thinking, well, probably good for you because you got a pretty nice place, right?
Right.
But what about the other people that don't?
Yeah.
And say I own a piece of property out here in Yelm, outside the urban, or whatever, out in Thurston County, and I got a couple acres, and I got my house, and I've got this other land that's not being used, and I have access to potable water. I have a septic system that will accommodate. I have all the water, I power there. Why can't I build 1,000 square foot mother-in-law unit or a little ADU that I can rent to you or to anybody I want, any way I want to do that? Because guess what? That is a unit of housing that we desperately need. The argument against it was sprawl. Oh, this is going to allow for development. I'm like, what are you talking about? There are already regulations that say that I can, if I've got a 5-acre parcel, I can only put one house on. I can't do 50 homes. I'm not trying to subdivide this and put 50 homes on my piece of property. I'm trying to build one unit, right? And
so how does the
it's
lot?
Just crazy.
Yeah, how does the lot splitting? What are the? Okay, I guess I have a few thoughts because my one thought is in defense of trees, mm-hmm. Seattle has cut down a ton of tree canopy, but that's Seattle, mm-hmm. and so now we're talking about rural areas. What are the? How do you?
For Seattle, for that, it's okay, right? It's okay because we're doing density and we're building up and we're doing this and it's a transit line and everything else, so they can justify that and everything else. But God forbid you have a piece of property that had, and I'm not about cutting down trees. I want to preserve that too, but within reason.
That's what I want to get
right? Within reason. And why is it okay here?
Right.
But it's not okay here.
Because the environmentalist in me is what are we gonna do here? Because what I'm seeing happen is what's gonna happen? Are we gonna concrete all of King County? And then just expect the green spaces to be, because I live in Duval right now, right? And so there's certain trailheads that get packed. People the rural roads get blocked up. They have to tow cars out of these county roads because people are getting out of town, and it's, I try not to be judgmental, but there's super nice vehicles blocking up these little county roads that I'm just wondering, what are these? This is right now the effects of what's already happening. So what is the plan? That they're gonna add double population within that area. Where are they gonna go? Where's their nature connection? Where's their access?
People should be able to live, play, recreate, work in their communities. We've taken that away, right? Through the Growth Management Act, through a lot of these policies.
And the need for density.
Have pushed in, and part of middle housing was about that. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm okay with that as it's being used within part of the solution. The middle housing bill was not the panacea. It was not going to cure everything. It's one piece of many, many pieces that have to be looked at, right? But when you look at that and you force all that in there and you concrete over this, and then you say, well, you can go here to play,
Right.
and you got to drive over here to do this, and you got to do it.
The driving.
Then you're seeing the impacts of all this other stuff. So when I'm dealing with my city of Eatonville, and in Eatonville, Roy, McKenna, all these are, because of the policy, you can't build homes there. You cannot increase infrastructure because the people here are saying you can't do that. So guess what? The people who teach in the school district of Eatonville do not live in Eatonville.
Right.
They live in Tacoma, they live in Puyallup, they live where they can't, and they drive.
Or they're
Right.
living in a converted
Right.
shed with
Or
a
something.
tarp.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, it's
the
so
illegal daddy.
so you look at this imbalance, and what I've been trying to argue and advocate for is balance. Why can't we build in that community? Why can't we increase the infrastructure? Why aren't we supporting a more robust wastewater treatment thing or more water or whatever? And they're like, no, you can't do that. Everybody's got to live here. Well, I'm not going to live in Seattle, right? I live in the county. I live in a really cool spot, and I like it. I like where I live, and most people do.
I can't even run for city council because I live outside the city.
And so it's like, and I'm not begrudging those who live in Seattle doing that. That's so fine. But when I'm listening to testimony from this group saying that you can't do this here because of whatever, because we need to preserve that, while at the same time building, like you said, the concrete jungle, all the stuff. Representative Mary Dye, you should listen to some of her stuff and look at some of the policies she did about tree canopy and decarbonization and how and what to do and what the cities need to do and all the different things. It's amazing what she's done. They don't pass her bills, right? She's a Republican from Pomeroy or somewhere in Eastern Line. She's a farmer. How will she know about that? She's one of the smartest people in the legislature. Brilliant when it comes to climate policy, right?
Yeah.
But her policies don't jive with what the narrative and the ideology of the day is, right? And this is where that disconnect is. You have this Seattle-centric policy, but I truly believe people in the state of Washington, both Democrats, Republicans, Independents, are looking at this going, yeah, it's time for a change. This centric thing is not working because it's not the same in Lacey, even as it is in Olympia, even as it is in Seattle or Tacoma or anywhere else. And these rural communities absolutely need our attention, and they need to be allowed to grow, and they need to be allowed to accommodate the people who live there, and their economies and everything else need to be, brought back up. One of the best things that was ever said to me in my district out towards Mount Rainier, he says, you know what we've allowed to be? A day-use community. I went, wow, that is impactful. I remember that was like many, many years ago, this guy said this to me. He says, yeah. He says, everybody comes up from Seattle up the mountain highway and clogs it up here, and they use us for a day. But if you look around, he says, do you see any new houses built here?
Right.
Do you see any new hotels, anything else? No, because those same people, the environmentalists, will say, you can't do that. You cannot build anything here, but you sure can come and use it. Well, it's being so used that for the first time in its history this year, and talk about controversial, Mount Rainier has a reservation system. So you and I couldn't hop in a car and hit Mount Rainier, spend the day up there, or you have friends come in, hey, let's all go up to Mount Rainier. We used to do all the time. Gotta make reservations. Hopefully you get them. Hopefully you can get in.
Yeah.
That's their solution to dealing with this problem. I don't know, we'll see how it works.
Yeah, I've come across some hot springs with the reservation system for the same, they're tender environments, and they can't just be trampled by whoever wants to go there whenever they want. But there's also the driving thing. Why? I'm not the best real estate agent. I'm new, and I know that sucking is part of being new. But most of the people I talk to, most of the people I like having conversations with, they're not ready to buy. Not in this area anyway. They want to buy, but most people have given up, or it's so unattainable that, or what ownership, the connotation of it is so shameful that they don't want to be associated with that. There's all these reasons. but people still have this longing to feel safe at home around people that they want to live near, and they want to be able to walk there. They want to be able to afford their housing, education, and food. And a lot of the people I know have all of those systems pretty close to home anyway, but they're still driving distance or not within walking distance of some of those things, or maybe they don't have the land for the food part, or and so like as an agent, I'm looking for land where people can build like specific housing for seniors, specific spaces for child, spaces where like there are youth mentors and outdoor education, like a space for children, a space for elders, a space for middle-aged.
It's called, you know what that's called?
A village?
It's called community. It's called a community, it's called a town, it's called a city. It's what we used to do. It's how we used to do this.
The zoning. Why is the zoning such a thing that keeps that from happening?
Okay, so I could spend a whole another 10 hours with you, but I can't. Talking on just this subject.
Okay.
Because we've created, and when I say we, not necessarily, but we in this aspect of legislature, of government, of policy, of cities, of zoning, of growth management, of all these, we've created this problem. We've created a problem while seeking a solution, right? The solution was we've got to prevent this and we have to protect this. And so we did all this, and some of it you do in a blinder, right? You have blinders on, some of it you work in a vacuum. And then over the course of time, it's been influenced by all sorts of stuff. And the topic today is what? Climate change, right? And we have a governor who the last 12 years, especially the last 4 years, that his ideology and all those that support it have pushed an agenda that is singular and focused. We passed a bill that will lead to the banning of natural gas. What the heck? What?
When?
This session. Yeah.
Well,
And it would have not passed. We were forced to stay there until almost 3 a.m. until the governor and the majority could get the votes to pass that bill. And when they finally twisted enough arms and they got the votes, they ran and passed the bill. Because it's part of his agenda. It's part of his legacy.
Yeah.
This climate agenda, right? And it's so short-sighted. Because what is it going to do? It's going to add more burden on the people of Washington State. It's going to add more cost to trying to develop what it is that you want to develop in community. And it's just one thing of many, 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 many things, right? The problem has been created in the manner of looking for the solution. There is a solution. We have to go back to go forward, right? We have to look at what we used to have. Community, towns, with that school, with the outdoor, with the park, with this, with that, where people could live there, they could work there, they could do whatever. It is not about just connecting communities, which I'm the transportation guy, so I'm about that. We need a robust infrastructure. We need capacity in our highways to drive efficient cars, non-polluting, eat whatever. But we're not going to solve it by building rail lines that we think we're building all these links so we can link people so they can, they can live here and work here. That's not building community.
Right. Well, we need we need the connection and the transportation between the communities and the people, but that's assuming that we're actually putting effort into building communities and not silos of existence. Yeah. I mean, the boxes, apartments are great. Renting there's time and space. All the housing.
You have to have everything.
Yeah, all those options are wonderful. But when that's all that's being built and those are the only options, that silo of existence.
But see, you're trying to find for your clients what I try to find for my clients, right? And when you started looking at the affordability issue, right? So this was an affordable community. Lacey, Thurston County, people would work in Tacoma and Seattle and live here because it was more affordable. Now, people work in this area and they live out in Shelton or down Chehalis or anything else. And now the people in Chehalis are looking to go to Morton or down to whatever or out towards South Bend because it's the only place they can find it. The problem is that as you start to do that, you find, well, I can't go out there because guess what? I can't build anything out there. I can't build houses out there. And if I do, they're very limited. And if I do, I have to accommodate all of these requirements. So what? Is it affordable housing? No, we're not building affordable housing.
So then it forces more expensive developments,
Sure
right?
it does.
Because in Duval, every working permit, last I heard, none of them were for houses for under $1 million.
Yeah.
And the square footage, this great home inspector, outlined the square footage average over the decades, and it's why is it not even in our awareness to build an 800 square foot house? That's plenty of room for people not everybody, but that's a lot. That's a castle to someone.
Because builders and developers have been vilified by the powers that be for so long that when I talk to my builders and developer friends that are still here, a lot of them are gone, a lot of them are in Montana, and they've left. Yeah. They've left because it's just so ridiculous here, right? And I remember back in 2018 when I was traveling around pitching this program about, saying we got to reduce costs by 25%, and here's how we're going to do that. And we did a pro forma. You know what a pro forma is, to show what it costs. Mm-hmm. People were blown away. They couldn't believe this. What do you mean? And I'm like, well, you want me to build you a $200,000 house? Let me show you how to do that, and let me show you how it's impossible, right? Because I can't even, before I even turn dirt, I'm $150,000 into it between the permitting, the environmental, the client, this, that. I thought, I can't build it for $50,000, right? So when you talk to these developers, the reason they're building the houses like that, one, there's demand, right? Yeah. But two, it's the only ones that will pencil for them. I mean, spec houses, I haven't seen a community build of spec houses in a long time. I just haven't seen that. There's one development going in close to where I live. It's within the urban growth boundary, and I know that piece of land. I know that development is 10 years in the making, because it used to be 2 farms, 2 things over there.
Yeah, is it big? How big?
I think it'll be maybe 100 homes, maybe 80, 100 homes, right? And I don't know what they'll be or whatever, but that's the only development I know of that's building single family homes right now. Now there's a lot of apartment complexes that are finishing up that were built and where they're being built are on areas that were originally designated for single family home neighborhoods, but they couldn't do it. So the only way they could pencil it or make it change zoning and put in boxes of apartments, which great, they're full, people are moving into them. But when you look at that whole thing, you start talking about, why can't they build this? Why won't they build this? Why won't they build whatever? They can't, because we've made it damn near impossible for them. So I've been working, and many others, to try to remove those barriers, but it's so hard. It's so hard when you're constantly up against that narrative, and that ideology, and whatever it is. And if you just go back over the last just 4 years, it's time for lunch, 4 years, right? And you look at what has been added on. And BIAW and realtors have done a great job, because they'll show you that. They'll show you all those costs, what it costs in a house. Look at all these things, all these policies that have been added on through legislation, through building codes, through environmental requirements, through whatever it is. The wildfire land WUI, we call it, the WUI codes, right? That say, climate change is forcing wildfires into urban areas. Okay, climate change or other things are doing that, or we've had a couple dry summers, right? But now there's new code that says all new development must have what? Sprinklers, windows that resist this, roofing, Well, guess what? That all costs more. And is it completely necessary, right? To do blanket policy so that the next person going to build it goes, damn, now I gotta buy these windows are $20,000 more than a normal window package. And I can't put gas in there. So I'm gonna have to do all electric stuff. Heat, that's gonna be another $10,000. And I can't use normal composition on the roof. That's gonna be another $5,000. And you get the picture now, all of a sudden it's like another $40,000-$50,000 on top of whatever it was to build just a year ago.
But that's interesting you mentioned about fire being that's actually one of their, fire is pushing people toward urban areas. Mm-hmm. And that's why we should build in urban areas. And yet fire is something that people have lived among
forever,
for a really long time. Yeah. And that goes back to conservation. And it seems like as much emphasis as there is on the environmental preservation in Washington, it's like it is somewhat short-sighted, seeing as that this area does provide a lot of oxygen for like the whole western part of the country.
So we can talk forestry. I've worked with all this forestry. It's very upsetting and very frustrating. And again, this administration, this governor, to use these unfortunate tragedies that we've seen in the last several years, these wildfires and whatever else, to further their agenda, right? And you can talk to people who actually know forests and actually know, right? So my wife's dad worked for Weyerhaeuser for 35 years in the woods, man. You talk about environmentalists. This guy knows trees like anybody. We have mismanaged our forests so poorly for years and years and years to allow them to get to the state. And when you have natural occurring situations or man-made occurring situations that cause these fires, and they are bigger and whatever, the over here we're saying, oh, that's climate change, we better change all this stuff because look what's happening. And over here they're going, no, we just need to manage our forests. And you have the Department of Natural Resources and the head of that agency finally going, we need more money for forestation and proper mitigation and everything else. And it's you have this created because of this, right? And then you look at some of the other policy about decarbon. I mean, our forests are our greatest, decarbonizing the natural, how they pull out of the air and everything else. And we should promote our forests, but we shouldn't let them languish. And we've learned over 100 years how to manage our forests and use the natural resource and the abundance of all those different things. But now we can't, and now we want to let we can't touch that, and can't harvest now, we got to add another 10, 15 years. Well, is that the right thing to do? Is that, is this science or is this ideology driving this stuff, right? Is this climate policy or is this forestry policy? And the two clash, right? And so as a result, these fires we've got to pass all these laws and codes because it could happen here. And yeah, we had some dry summers. This summer might not be dry. I've lived here all my life, right? I'll be 56 here in a couple months. And I've lived here all my life. I remember summers that were hot, summers that were cold. I remember seasons that were fire. Last year was not a fire season, right? I can remember years where we had massive snow for skiing and years when we didn't have any snow.
But
it just kind of goes that way, right?
There's something, I'm just experiencing fire season here. Like, so the summer before last, it was really smoky. I remember because I was moving and people were like, why are you moving? I was like, I have to. And like breathing heavy and like what is good? And it was my first experience of it. And a lot of new people, like you said, are coming, and a lot of older people who've been here a while are going. And there is this like shock factor to experiencing that, where part of me was like, oh my gosh, the world is burning. And maybe we can get into like the mythological, because like that story, that narrative, like you're saying, the agenda maybe is one word for it, and also the story that we believe about our place in the world is another way that I think like that hits home for people. And if they already believe a certain set of things, like humans are bad for the environment, or we shouldn't cut down trees to live, there's something about that's like, it's actually reinforced somewhat just in the turnover, maybe. But maybe that's just my own experience, but that's just what came to mind.
Well, I think that, there are a lot of factors that contribute to the different things. And yes, we had a couple of years that were really bad fire seasons, and some of that was up north in Canada. And due to our geography here, due to how, we have what's called the Fraser River outflow, and the winds are certain, that comes right down into Puget Sound, and you have the conversion zone because of the Olympics, and you got all this stuff, and we're in a basin, and oh my gosh, I live in a valley where my lake is, and it just, everything settled in there, and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It's bad. It was bad for a couple days, right? It was, and it blew away. I remember I was here when Mount St. Helens exploded, and the ash hit, and all the stuff, and the devastation that did to the climate and the environment for that period of time. Natural. Are these fires man-made? Are they caused because the temperature went up 0.1% over the last 10 years? are these, I mean, the debate will happen forever.
Yeah.
The point I'm trying to make is this, to kind of bring it all full circle, and then we are coming up on getting close to time. Balance, right? Certain groups want to use these issues in order to affect policy, in order to affect change of a certain mindset, of a certain ideology, of a certain agenda, right? And we have to be mindful of how it impacts all of these other things that we're trying to do. You can have affordable housing and have good environmental policy. You can have growth and good environmental policy. And an example I use is this. If you look back, and I mean, I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s and stuff, and I remember the industry and smokestacks and different things. Look around. Do you see that anywhere? Do you see the different things that we're looking at? I mean, the examples like in cars, right? I remember, I mean, you know, even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I mean, the average car polluted a hell of a lot more than it does today. It got 12 miles a gallon of gas, because gas was cheap, blah, 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 blah. Look at how much technology has moved us forward. Now we have electric cars. Now we have, you know, I drive a hybrid, you know, the best of both worlds. And then you look at all these different things that have moved us. We're getting better and better and better and improving. And we do that over time. We do that through innovation, through technology and everything else and working. Where we screw things up is where we start to mandate, remove, influence, and force these things into play before we're ready for them, or because of an agenda, and we stifle innovation, and we don't think about where we're coming, and we don't think about the consequences on all. And so when we started this conversation talking about affordable housing and different things in this, there are consequences, right? And you know, we have to figure this out so that we can bring that balance back. I seek balance. I seek balance in politics. I seek balance in my life. I seek balance between being in this office and being outside, right? We have to convey that. You're doing that. You're trying to find a way to do that within real estate and your outdoor stuff and community. And overarching is the restoration of community. I truly believe that in all aspects. And we'll talk another time about homelessness and drugs and mental health issues and stuff that we
That'd be great.
Talk about on, you know, in depth. But that's what we need to do, you know, and I think as a policymaker, there is a pathway if there's a willingness to do it. And so that's kind of my thought with all this different stuff. And there is hope.
I believe in that. And that was actually in the beginning episodes of this podcast and my interview process. That was my big final question, is like, what gives you hope in humanity? And I think I actually, and maybe it was someone's answer, I don't remember, but like at some point, like hope seemed like this currency that wasn't necessarily essential for progress to still happen and for people to still believe. But that, I think that goes back to like the story that we are willing to believe in ourselves. There is, I think this, what we believe about ourselves is also how we change and find balance. Are you a Libra?
Gemini.
Because I'm a Libra, and I'm like, he's got to be a Libra, because I'm always looking for the balance and things too. And
I'm not even balanced, but I'm always in conflict.
That's why you're seeking.
Geminis are always in conflict. It's just the dual personality.
That's why I like Geminis. Yeah. So,
what? Yeah.
Do you have time for a few more questions? Final
questions? real quick, and then I gotta grab some lunch. I gotta get on the road here.
Okay. We'll do rapid fire. What advice do you have for new investors in real estate?
Get educated. You know. Be careful of pitfalls. If it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Stick with what you know. I mean, I love the group that I talked to. It'd be fun to talk to them again. You know, I, in my career and in the market, doing all sorts of different things, I've had opportunities to do stuff, and I am so glad that I talked to people who were much smarter than I, and that I trusted my gut. Because I didn't make the mistakes and the pitfalls that so many of my colleagues did. Because they think, oh, I can make a quick buck here, I can do this here, and everything else. Not always the case. Good investing in real estate is one of the best. It will always be one of the best investments, right? Good investing is a long-term play, right? You can get rich quick, but it's really the long-term play where when you do it right. it works better.
Some of the reasoning I hear for people, how to encourage regular people, and some of this is to change the connotation of ownership and investors, the big bad investor, was why do you think average people, if they have it within them to invest in real estate? And one ethical reason I've heard is, well, because hedge funds are doing it and they're doing it in a less heartful way than community members could.
Yeah.
Do you have a thought on that?
Yes and no. I mean, again, a free market. I'm not going to begrudge a fund because they discovered what we have all known forever, and that's real estate's a great investment. And you know, I mean, it's no different than bringing 10 of my friends together and we all pitch in 10 grand and we go buy stuff and we create something. They just do it on a massive scale, and you have to look at the history of how that all happened too, because you have to go back and look at everything that was happening before the crash, right? And crazy financing, all this stuff, and then the massive overregulation, and then this abundance of home. I mean, we had, you know, foreclosures and everything. When property management, we increased the amount of houses we were managing because people couldn't sell. And all. Well, of course, you're going to have people come in. It's the nature of business and everything else, and they're going to buy up all these houses and stuff. And they discovered, wow, this is a pretty good investment. They're going to do that. I think there's balance between both. I think that as people are seeking to build portfolios, but the bottom line is we should not make those who are willing to take the risk and invest and create housing and opportunity for people to have housing, we should not make them the enemy. And that, unfortunately, has become a lot of the narrative, because the flip side to that is those that think, for whatever utopian reason, we don't need investors and people to buy real estate and build real estate, the government will do it. And no, the government will not do it.
Makes me scared.
We have the Housing Trust Fund, we build housing, we do stuff within the government, but you will never create the amount and quantity of housing ever to deal with all the stuff. You have to have private investors, you have to have the private sector, and you need investors to do that. So we need to make sure we don't make it impossible for people to continue to invest, continue to buy homes, continue to fix up homes. We have to have that.
Yeah, the balance of the public and private sector is still like, the balance between tenant and landlord, or like owner or renter,
it's out of balance.
Whatever. Yeah. What is your proudest moment between property management, between being a representative, or maybe as a father or family man? What is, like, it's seeing as everything as a holistic picture, because I feel like I'm crafting very intentionally my future at this point, and I admire the painting in which I see, looking at your life and hearing your story. So I'm curious, like, what is, maybe it's not a holistic perspective to you and you can speak to that, but like, is there something that really sticks out, like, oh, I did good?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any life. I always say my greatest accomplishments have come out of my biggest adversities, and I've had plenty. You know, I mean, it's no perfection in any of it. I think, you know, obviously, having a family and raising my two boys and doing things and overcoming those adversities and seeing the successes and, you know, and the challenges that go along with that and sticking with it, not always easy. But I mean, if you say, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? It's my time in Scouts as being a Scoutmaster. I really believe that was, and I've served on so many different boards, Boys and Girls Clubs, and I'm on a great foundation I work on stuff for youth. But that moment in my life when I was Scoutmaster and doing all that was the funnest. That was the most impactful. To see youth and these boys come back and people I still talk to, and to see where they're at in their lives now, and have them come up to me and say, you know, because of this, I did this, and you know, and my last experience was with my son Evan and a group of 8 boys that were in the patrol, and they all came up through school and Cub Scouts and everything else, and every one of those boys made Eagle Scout, every one, and they're all still friends. They're all off in college and doing different things, and in the summertime they're all on the lake when they come home to visit. I love that. I can sit there and watch them playing and listen to them laughing, and they're all 20 and 21 years old. And, I mean, one's at MIT, my son's at Pepperdine, another one's over here doing this, one's in the military. It's awesome. It's awesome. So that, I think, is my greatest thing. In the world of politics, I think, you know, I can pinpoint a lot of different policy, but I think if there's a legacy or something I want to be known for, it's being willing to have that relationship, to work with you even though I disagree with you, to have, you know, to find commonality. That will be my mark, you know, and the bills I do, you know, I mean, this session was so tough, and we started with the Senate and the House and the transportation budget here, and in the end of the day, working with the chair and working with all these people and everything else, I helped pass a budget unanimously. That's pretty amazing when you can take all that and then I'm proud to tell the people of Washington State, I did that. And here's how we did it. They're like, how'd you do that? I'm like, well, it wasn't easy, but you know, you gave a little, gave a little, gave a little, you know.
Yeah.
So I just think that's kind of, I can't, you know, there's some housing policy that's been done, but I think my greatest accomplishment has yet to happen. Mm-hmm. And this session will be a testament to it if I can pull it off. And I'll leave you with a little teaser on it. I want to end the war between landlords and tenants.
Me too.
And I got a plan.
Great.
I'm bringing people together, and I am willing to get on that battlefield and wave the flag, and because it's got to stop. We have to stop it, and we have to figure this out because it's not working.
Yeah.
And as we all know, I mean, nobody wins a war, right? So it's just if I can do that and use all this knowledge and stuff and relationships and, you know, a little political credit here and this, that, and everything to do that, and I can accomplish that, I can be done at some point in time and be pretty happy that we're able to do that. If I can't, oh man, it's gonna be frustrating.
If you can't, then there's a lot of other people who will help you try again.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm here to end the war, I think, between the generations.
Yeah.
And like the way we house them and care for each other. So thank you so much for your work. I cannot thank you enough. I think I want to speak on behalf of all nature mentors and outdoor educators. Thank you so much for your work to keep, I was gonna say students, like children, but like youth especially, but all people connected to natural spaces and the education programs in tech. I teach at Carkeek weekly right now, and there's like, me too, what a teacher.
I lived in Ballard when I was going to CLU.
And the salmon, like feeding the salmon and learning about the salmon streams and feeding the baby. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, like what a teacher. I mean, I'm blown away so often, just as much as the kids are. So thank you for your work in that and housing. And I look forward to another conversation about mental health. That would be great. Yeah. Because that's such a big piece.
It's huge. And thanks for what you're doing. You know, I'm glad to see that you're combining these different things. And it's always amazing truly when you can combine your passion and make it into your job and your career and everything else, but with an overarching aspect of seeking good and seeking community. And it's not easy to do, you know, in the world that we live in. But and as I always say that in my outdoor caucus meetings or whatever, I'm like, go get outside, go outside, go get outside. No matter what the weather, get outside, go enjoy it. You know, we're pretty lucky to live here. So
outside so much here. What gives you hope in humanity?
Well,
if you can say it concisely.
There's a lot of really good people, obviously, you know, that outweigh the bad. I think that, you know, we always hear human nature and there's, you know, the bad people. My faith, right? And believing that there's something bigger than me, right? Greater than me. I just, you know, in the people who I've met, and I've been very fortunate in both in my career and in my community and in my political stuff, I've met some just amazing people. and I've seen and I've heard their stories and I've seen different things, and then I tell their story. I'm going to tell your story, because that's what we do, you know, and you keep sharing that. And that's why there's hope, because as long as people are interested and they want to fix something or they want to do something and they're willing to, you know, it will continue. It's when we stop. It's when we allow the powers to be and we go into full acceptance mode. Now, acceptance is important, right? But you also have to look at it and go, wait a minute, you know, I can accept this, but no, I need to push back. You get involved, you know. I mean, I can start talking about, you know, you got to be involved. You got to, you know, people say, oh, how did you run for office? It's not a mystery. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not up here. I'm just a guy that owns a business and lives in this community and wanted to serve the people around me, and this was a way to do that. Anybody can do it, really, and more people should, on every level. Find something you're passionate about, get involved, help people, because whether you're helping one person or 100, it doesn't matter. You're doing something. That's hope.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
You give me hope. You're an amazing person.
Thanks. So are you. Yeah. Thanks for coming all the way down here today.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully you won't have too much traffic driving back, because it's never easy.
Yeah, we'll see. The sun's out, so maybe people are going to
looking
take the
good
road.
now. It's like, yeah.